Hi guys, it's Sophie and welcome to my September wrap-up. So first off, sorry the lighting's a little bit bad. I think it's just got to that time of the year where I'm going to have to rely on internal lights, so you're going to have to put up with it, I'm afraid, until next summer. But before we start, I just wanted to show you the books I've read, because I think I may have slightly outdone myself. So this is the tower of all the books I've read this month. Some of them are huge too. I didn't feel like I read that much, but clearly I'm wrong. Clearly I don't know how much I read. If we start with the Little Black Classics that you probably spied on top, I read 4 of those this month and had sort of mixed feelings about them, which is good. I like having mixed feelings about things. The first one I read was The Nightingales Are Drunk by Hasef, or Hasif, I'm not sure. And this guy is a 14th century Persian poet, and they're really good. I feel like I've talked about this already, but if I have already, I apologise. I gave this one 5 stars, and if you sort of just feel like expanding your horizons a little bit, it's something I'd never considered reading before. And the next one I have is The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. This was a disappointment for me. I think I spoke in my haul about how everyone thinks I'm just gonna love Poe, and I see why they think I would love Poe, and I don't. So essentially they are sort of creepy horror stories. These are I think it's 2 or 3 short stories that he wrote, with the title one being The Telltale Heart. They're all sort of about bodies really, but they didn't scare me, and that is my marker, and I actually only gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. And the next one I read was Miss Brill by Catherine Mansfield. This one I gave 3 out of 5 stars. I thought I quite enjoyed it when I read it, but the reality is I don't remember all that much of what happened, and it fits nice and neatly into that love story trope that I just hate. I don't know, I didn't feel as though there was that much that I personally got from this book, but some of you may absolutely love it. And then the last Little Black Classic that I read this month, I absolutely adored, and that was How Much Land Does a Man Need by Leo Tolstoy. This is 2 short stories by Tolstoy, sort of about greed to an extent, and just by sort of humans, and it was really good. It was probably one of the best short stories. The first one, the title story, How Much Land Does a Man Need, was probably one of the best short stories I've read this year, and essentially they're very bleak, and I love bleak books, and I definitely would try and pick up something full length by Tolstoy having read this, because the writing style did really appeal to me. So the next one I have is Theo by Ed Taylor. So this one I think I sort of spoke about, the cover really drew me to it, and I kept sort of seeing it everywhere, and the Gatsby-esque thing sort of drew me in. Unfortunately I really didn't like this one, I only gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Just tell you a little bit about it. It is about a young boy who's I think 10 years old, and it's about his relationship with his mother and his father. His father is a rock star and is sort of jetting off all over the world, and his mother has her own sort of personal issues and is in and out of rehab. So what it really is a sort of expose of fame through the eyes of a child, which seemed interesting. It seemed like an interesting concept, and it's told over a very short space of time also, which I tend to enjoy those, but I never really felt any real connection to the characters. I understood sort of that Theo's life was not good, but didn't particularly care as to why. So whether that makes me heartless or whether it means it's written badly, I don't know. So the next book I read was Gravity by Tess Gerritsen. So this is a sci-fi novel, and if you watch my channel more often you know that I don't really read all that much sci-fi, although I did really enjoy it. This is the kind of sci-fi I like. So it was more factual, and it was more sort of realistic. It's still relatively unrealistic, and I'm sure that if I were a geneticist I would just say, God, that's horrendous, but it wasn't sort of space opera, which is what I don't enjoy so much. So this sort of basic premise is that a group of astronauts are sent up to do spaceship repairs. Again, good, that happens in real life, brilliant. And having got up there they encounter an illness of types, and it's whether or not they are allowed to come home, and sort of the relationships between the people in the ship and the relationships they have with people who are left back home. I absolutely tore through this one. I think I read it in like 3 hours. But yeah, it was perfectly enjoyable. I think I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars, but likely when I do my review it will go down to 3, because I don't think anything particularly stood out. I just think it was a good filler novel, if that makes sense. And then the next one I have to talk about is 1984 by George Orwell. So before anything else, how stunning is this edition? So I'm 22 years old and this is my first read through of 1984, and I kind of wanted to save it, and I think I knew when everyone at my school was reading it that I was going to like it, and I wanted to save it until I was a bit older, and I'm so glad I did. I really enjoyed it. It's really easy reading. If you don't often read sort of novels of this type, novels that are sort of classics or modern classics I suppose, it's great fun and not sort of tiring or taxing in any way. I'm sure most of you know what this novel's about, but if you don't, essentially it's about an individual who lives within a society in which surveillance is commonplace, and your sort of sense of self is overwhelmed by the sense of community and the sense of giving towards a general cause. But it isn't the fact that these individuals get the choice, it's that is enforced. And there are all kinds of sort of, it's the thought police. If you've heard of the phrase thought police, that's where this comes from. I thought it was a really interesting novel, and I have read bits back of it again, particularly the sort of manuscript manifesto pieces I've read several times back. And my plan would be with this one to reread it in about a year or so and annotate. I tend to annotate books that I enjoy, but to go over it and read it again, because I wanted my first read just to be fun and just to be for the story, but I think it would be very interesting to go back and actually analyse it a little bit, have a little bit more of a literary insight I suppose, along with the historical context of this novel. And then the next one I read was How to Be Both by Ali Smith. My first Ali Smith, and I was so excited for this one. I did actually like it, I did enjoy it, and I really enjoyed the writing style, but I don't think this would be my favourite book of hers, though I've read no other. I think that I really enjoyed one half of this story, but I found it quite difficult to relate to the other section, despite the writing being something I did enjoy. Not a fault of the book, I don't think. I think it's a fault of my preference and the limit of my reading and my reading historically at the moment. But about this book, before we go into it too much, essentially it's a sort of dual perspective, but it's two halves. So, and just as a side note, it's exactly two halves, and that makes me so happy when it's actually two halves. You divide the pages and it's in the middle. But yeah, two halves of a story of these young women, and one is told in sort of the Renaissance era, and one is told relatively contemporary. I think it's the 1960s or 1980s, something like that. Relatively recent. So yes, it's about these two girls and how they're interacting with the world, and sort of learning how those stories fit together. Some books have the sort of older perspective at the start and the younger one at the back, or recent one at the back, and mine had the more recent to begin and the older at the end. And whilst I think that I enjoyed the latter half less than the beginning, I'm very glad they were that way round, because I was so engaged with the beginning of the book I was desperate to keep reading, whereas if it were the other way around I may never have finished this one, or well I would have, but nowhere near as fast as I actually did. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars, but I will definitely be picking up more Ali Smith and seeing what else is out there. And then the next one we have is Zadie Smith's On Beauty. This is my second Zadie Smith that I've read. I read Northwest or NW. Still no one's told me which way round is it, because I feel like an idiot when I say both. But this is the second Zadie Smith that I've read, and I found this experience completely different to the other that I've read. Completely different, and I enjoyed this one so much more. I was considering unhauling this book and just giving up on it because of the fact I never really got engaged with the other novel, Northwest, I'm just going to call it that. I never got involved with Northwest and didn't have the connection, despite sort of seeing the benefit of the writing and seeing, you know, there is some sort of poetic nature, I think, to Zadie Smith's writing, but I never connected to those characters. I could never quite take the emotions that she was portraying and relate them to the people that I was trying to imagine in my mind. This was a different matter, and I think potentially it might have helped that I read this as an audiobook for the majority of the time, so I sort of switched between the two, but sometimes when I find sort of the writing style or the punctuation style is holding me up, listening to an audiobook can be helpful to get into the story before I start to read it on paper, so that I'm not sort of jolted almost by the unfamiliar method in which the writing's conveyed. And then when I went back and read the sections that I did read directly from the text, it was absolutely fine, because by then I was interested in the story. Essentially it is a story about sort of about sort of classism, but also about race. So basically it deals with these two families and they are in a big fight, and the two dads, they're both professors, and they have quite sort of stark contrast of the views they hold about the topics that they teach and about how topics should be taught. But these families, they don't feud and never speak to one another. There's all kinds of interactions between other members of the family, and it makes a really interesting book. It's a proper family saga, so if you enjoy that, then definitely, you know, have a go. Even if you didn't like her writing the first time round, I think she's one that's worth a reread. Okay, so I think that's probably about long enough for video number 1, and I will see you very soon in the second half of my September wrap up. Bye bye.